Hello everyone, my name is Samuel Marcos. I have a honors in psychological science, so I'll be speaking to you about psychology and also philosophy, which I've read a lot about, mostly psychology because I have the education behind it. To begin, one of the most fundamental ways to explain psychology is through their physicians and previous experts that have conducted the most psychology there is, and those physician experts, I would say there's two main ones, which is Freud and Jung. So Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, they work hand in hand, and Carl Jung specifically critiques a lot about Freud. And however, Freud doesn't critique too much about Jung, maybe depending on the timeline. And that's where philosophy gets integrated into psychology, because philosophy is about critiquing someone else's ideas and providing reason about why that person that is critiquing the other person's ideas is more superior than the previous person. So there's a lot about Carl Jung. So whenever you hear Jung, it's about Carl Jung, and whenever you hear Sigmund Freud, it's about Freud. There's a lot about Carl Jung critiquing Sigmund Freud, which Jung believes, in a sense, on the premise of the philosophy that I've said about the critiquing of it is the main part. Jung, in that sense, believes that he is superior than Freud. Now, I'm not here to say which one is more superior, Jung or Freud. I'm here to provide the evidence that they produced in a verbal manner. So let's start with Sigmund Freud, because I believe that he was one of the more original ones before. Freud spoke about, and I'll draw this later when I get a whiteboard, and I'll draw it up about the iceberg and like a pyramid sort of in a way that Freud says about the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious. And I'll get that in the whiteboard and I'll explain that better for you. Just for the meantime, just imagine that there is a pyramid shape, the top being the most narrow and most compact, like a pyramid is, and the bottom being the most broadest sense and having all the weight. Now, this is the pyramid, okay? At the top of the pyramid, which is the least amount, is called the conscience, and then in the middle part is called the subconscious, and at the bottom, which is the most heaviest part, is called the unconscious. Now, the reason why Freud believes that the unconscious is the most heaviest part is because most of our behavior that we conduct in the world, that we action about in the world, comes from the unconscious. Now, what does the unconscious mean? The way Freud explains it is the unconscious happens in our dreaming. So there's a lot about Freud's interpretation of dreams. He actually wrote a book on the interpretation of dreams, which I have read, and it's very, very interesting. When I was reading that book, and after that book, I would be going many, many months about understanding what happened in my dream, and I would have a dream journal, which is just a page in my normal journal that I have. If you like to see my journal, it's quite cool. Good one. Nice pen. I do journal a lot, and I used to write out my dreams a lot because they were important. It's one of the first things I get taught in psychology, and this is why I love psychology. Now, why would Freud be saying that the dreams are important? Because In a way, everyone has had dreams, I've hoped. If you do not have dreams, then there's something wrong with your psychology. There's something, because the dreams often are unexplainable, but what Freud says that in the dreams there are symbols. And yes, you can go to a psychologist and understand what's going on with the symbols, and that psychologist will do their best to tell you what they believe your dream is about. However, in a modern world, that is inconvenient for you to go to a psychologist to book with them, because you're not going to get a psychologist appointment tomorrow or even the day of, and the next day and the next day you're most likely going to dream. So you're going to forget that dream, you're going to continue dreaming. Now, dreaming is important because you get REM sleep, but that's a whole other story with the biology and the physiology of the brain. I'm just focusing on the psychology here, step by step, to make the understanding of health easier for the person to understand, the average person, ordinary person like you to understand. I'm not talking about ordinary as or average as a financial status or a relationship status, just saying a human being. Just for a human being to understand that has very brief understanding of psychology. In the dreams we have, because I dream as well, we have symbols. Now we need to understand what these symbols are saying to us. And I'll give you an example. I commonly have dreams that I get in car accidents. Okay? So what does that mean to me is that driving a car for me is a risk. And my unconscious, and yes, there may be a correlation with, or a correlation with the brain and the dreaming and then the psychology. This is called metaphysics, and it's a very new topic that is being spoken about. But yeah, let's just go back to my example about me getting in car accidents. I have to be cautious how I drive. And I drive like a lunatic, I drive like a maniac. If there was a police following me all the time, I wouldn't have a license. Okay. Now, when I have those dreams, I need to be cautious about how I drive. When I get in the car and I've had previous accidents that have been my fault, my brain is preparing me for the future. That's what dreams kind of do. Dreams recollect the past, and they're presenting a potential future scenario that that you don't want to get into. You do not want to get into these future scenarios. So that's why the dreams are protecting you in a way. And if we are not cautious and we are not aware of the things that are happening inside of our dreams, we can get ourselves into huge trouble. So that's why it's important to understand the dreams. Now, we have Jung, on the other hand, and yes, I've done my psychology about Jung. I've studied a few topics about Jung, but if I'm honest, they were only brief. In my psychology course, the most I learned about Jung is Jung has a sense of personality, and he has a tendency to judge the person on the personality that they have. Now, continuing about the route of my psychology course, Jung talks about the collective unconscious, and the collective unconscious is the most unique characteristic of the self. And yes, Jung talks about the self a lot. It's very important to understand the self. Now, this is where Freud and Jung actually combined. If you want to know yourself the most, you must understand your dreams. And away from the dreams, you must understand your own personality. That's why something like this, a journal, And there's notes and notes and notes. Okay. I am learning about myself more and more. Now, as much as I want to rant and go along different trails of the conversation, I must do my best to stay on course, and that course is still about my psychology course, about Jung and the collective unconscious. So the uniqueness of the person. How can the person be unique? How can the person find out who they are? Self-reflection and self-discovery. Jung is huge on self-discovery. So is Freud. However, Freud focuses more about the broad sense of psychology, whereas Jung focuses more on the specifics of the person. So does Freud focus on the specifics, but not as much as Jung. So you have Freud, who's more about the broad sense of psychology, like dreams. Everyone has dreams. Okay, let's be specific about what dreams that person's having. And then you have Jung. Okay, you have to understand who you are. Who are you? And you have to spend your whole life finding out who you are, not who someone else is, who you are. That is the purpose of Jung. Now, I can steer away from the psychology course because I've heard a lot about Jung, heard a lot about Freud, so I went and I bought some books about Jung and Freud. If I'm honest, my personal opinion, when reading Freud, I can't say it was a walk in the park, but it was much easier than reading Jung. It's the way they wrote it, the kind of character they are, the kind of person they are. Freud is a bit more easygoing than Jung, and you might have heard of things like Freud as crazy phenomena that he brings on, which are true, that he has had crazy phenomena, but you have to be skeptical. Why is someone as smart as that, who understood whenever he was alive, why did he think these things? And why did Jung critique him? Because when you're critiquing someone, you can't critique someone that you're not interested in. It's pointless. It's pointless. If you're interested in one sport and you're not interested in the other, which one would you critique more? You would critique the sport that you're interested in because you think that you could have done better. If you're doing another sport that you have no experience in, you wouldn't critique them. You're like, I have no idea. If you're an honest and reasonable person, which I hope you are. Now, Jung, away from my course, I read a few books about Jung. The way he writes is phenomenal. Very interesting person. Very interesting physician. If you like, there's a YouTube video on an interview. It's very old, not ancient, but it's older. The way they speak is a bit different. Very interesting though. Now, to summarize Jung away from the course, he talks about introversion and extroversion. Why am I telling you this? Because it is your personality. You have to find out which side you are leaning on. Are you leaning more of an introverted side? Are you leaning more of an extroverted side? There's nothing wrong with either. Nothing wrong with either. Optimally, we have to be both. Have to be some introverted and some extroverted. We have to be both. Now, why we have to be both is in different situations, we need to be different. We need to be either extroverted in this situation, introverted in this situation. Now, let me give you some examples about where you would want to be extroverted. You would want to be extroverted in social settings because in social settings, extroverts are definitely liked more. Me, myself, I'm naturally extrovert. It's very good at sports, athletic, so it's easy for me to be extroverted. It was very difficult for me to become introverted. Let me get that clear. I was very uncomfortable being introverted. Right now, as I am discussing this conversation with you, I am both. I am telling you how the kind of personality that I am, and I'm doing my best to describe and explain psychology just to any person who's watching this. So I am being a bit of both, naturally extroverted. Now, it took me a lot of time to be introverted. My story is I moved out of my family home. Currently, I'm back in my family home. I moved out of my family home and I isolated from the world in a sense. And COVID was actually a catalyst for me to become introverted because lockdowns and stuff like that. It was COVID was very difficult for extroverts because I can't say it wasn't difficult for introverts as well. Don't get me wrong. For extroverts, they were so social and they always had to be outside, always had to do something. Because why would a person always have to do something? Always have to do that. Why? Why would an extrovert not be able to sit in their room and meditate? Why not? That is a brilliant question to ask yourself. If you are extroverted, why are you unable to be by yourself? Now, on the other end, if you have an introvert, why are you unable to participate in social events and social activity as much as the extroverts? Why not? And I can only provide the answer for specific people, and yes, that's leaning towards Jung, because it's talking about personality and character. So yeah, that's a lot to take in, and they are brilliant questions to start on.